Hello and welcome to another video that promises to get you the very top grades. Today I'm focusing on just this quotation from Macbeth, and I'm going to apply it to any question you can possibly get asked in a way that will get you at least a grade 7. Now, I actually made this video yesterday and it was 23 minutes long, and I thought, Mr. Salles, you're an idiot, who's going to watch that? So please let me know in the comments below if this video succeeds. Our quotation, tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day. And these are Macbeth's words after he's learnt of the suicide of his wife. This can be described, and it's some vocabulary I want you to take away with you, as nihilism. Nihilism is the belief that life is ultimately pointless and has no meaning. Now, we're going to look at every possible question you could be asked at GCSE, and it will either be about the guilt of the characters or whether they make moral choices, about whether they're powerful characters or not. You might get a question on the nature of kingship. You could definitely get one obviously on Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, and you'll definitely get one on the supernatural. And then it's possible but highly unlikely that you'd get a question on Duncan Banquo and Macduff, so I will prepare you for those three as well. But in this column I've got something much more useful for you, because whatever the question is that comes up, this is what the question really needs. When you start discussing ideas of the patriarchy, a society controlled by men in their interests, or the contemporary views of Christianity, or the great chain of being, which I'll explain in case you don't know it during the video, and ideas about fate and destiny, if you're discussing those, you're automatically looking at at Shakespeare's purpose and therefore gaining the top grades. Right, so let's go to the quotation and consider it in terms of the patriarchy. Well, we immediately ask questions about Macbeth's marriage here. His reaction to her death is not grief at the fact that she has died. In fact, he says she should have died hereafter in quite a neutral way. Instead, he's obsessed by his own predicament, that he is trapped in time, an endless series of tomorrows that are always the same from day to day. Each day is the same, and he looks upon each day and finds them petty and slow in pace. So his wife's death is actually completely irrelevant to him because he has a nihilistic perspective. He believes that life is pointless, and therefore grieving over his wife's death is also pointless. But in terms of the patriarchy, this shows how men have utterly dismissed the points of view of women. He is not interested in why she's committed suicide. He's not interested in how he's helped to bring this about. He's just simply ignoring it because he feels he has greater problems, which is to face up to life as a completely pointless experience. So we could choose to interpret this as Shakespeare's disgust at the way that women are completely marginalised in society, and even the most catastrophic event where they would choose to take their own lives is simply dismissed, and even makes this happen off stage to point out how vicious and vile this society is in putting male interests so far above female interests. Now, hopefully you will see that that analysis would fit a question on guilt, a question on morality, a question about power, male and female power in the play, a question on Lady Macbeth and Macbeth. So we're hitting loads of these just by looking at the patriarchy. Let's look now at Christianity. Okay, well, Lady Macbeth's suicide, which prompts Macbeth to say these words, can be seen as God's punishment. She has deliberately chosen to summon up the murdering ministers to make her evil, and she's deliberately chosen an evil path. We know that she is obsessed with the idea of hell. When in the sleepwalking scene, she says, hell is murky. She knows that her soul is going to live in hell forever because she utterly believes in this Christian society, which all of Shakespeare's contemporaries would have believed in. I say all, obviously, there would be exceptions. Well, one exception is Macbeth. When we read this, we can see that Macbeth's personal tragedy isn't that he believes he's going to go to hell. It's that he's still stuck in this life that is still proceeding in a petty pace and is the same from day to day. What he was hoping for was kingship that gave him a life that was worth living, a life that was full of variety, passion, energy, and instead what he's found is he can take no pleasure in any of this. And this is because he has a nihilistic view. He believes there is no God. There is no divine punishment coming for him. He isn't going to go to hell. His belief is simply that he's living out a punishment now. Not because God is punishing him, but because life is a punishment. Ultimately, life is pointless to Macbeth because there is no God to give it meaning. Now, if we take how the audience would have responded to this, this is further proof that Macbeth should die, and it's further proof that God is punishing him, not waiting until hell, not waiting until he punishes Macbeth's soul. He's giving Macbeth his heart's desire, kingship, but he is also destroying that experience for him as punishment for the regicide. So God has intervened during life here to torture Macbeth, to punish him justly from the contemporary perspective for committing this great crime of regicide. Well, now we've talked again about morality and power and kingship here with regicide. We've talked again about Lady Macbeth and Macbeth. So we're doing pretty well. Now we need to hit the other ones with the great chain of being. So the great chain of being, I'll explain the illustration here, is just a way for the church to explain the supreme power of God. However, within the class system, it's a way for the nobles to say that their position in society is a natural state appointed by God. And this therefore establishes the social order as desired by God. So let me explain that in more detail. At the top of the great chain is God. Then there are God's angels. You remember the angels trumpeting about Duncan's death in Macbeth's imagination when he's worried about killing Duncan. Next we have the king or queen appointed by God. Then we have all the nobles who have been appointed by God. Then beneath that you have the class system. So you've got people who've got independent wealth. They're probably merchants in the city. They're also given a status by God. And then beneath that you have the working classes who serve on the land, working on the estates, and they have a low status which again is appointed by God. In other words, the great chain of being is a social order which says everybody is born rich or poor, and that's pretty much the way it has to stay. And that's why noble people only marry other noble people and poor people marry other poor people, because that's God's will. And underneath that you've got the various classes of animals, and they are also domesticated and controlled by man, because man has been appointed by God to be in charge. So we can read Macbeth as a warning about what will happen to you if you go against God by disrupting the great chain of being. Macbeth has killed Duncan, and this is the ultimate sin. You can't do it. You can't go further up the great chain of being among living people. God is appointed by divine right. The king is appointed by divine right by God, and therefore killing the king is the ultimate attack on God, which is why God punishes Macbeth by giving him the very thing he desires, but making it an empty experience, one that leaves him, instead of full of joy and optimism, leaves him with this nihilistic perspective where he is unable to experience any joy in any part of his existence. In fact, he's almost entirely without emotion. He's not even able to feel any grief and sadness at the death of his wife. Now, Shakespeare is doing this because he wants to reinforce the case for King James II being the rightful king. So you will recall the Gunpowder Plot of 1605 and how the mood in the country among many was to get rid of this king who had come from Scotland. Many didn't want him to arrive, and they didn't believe in his right to be king. Furthermore, many of them would have wanted to become kings themselves. Now, this play is performed at court, not in the theatre. It's performed in front of King James, for King James. Therefore, Shakespeare delivers this powerful political message, which is, if you start killing or dreaming of killing the king, God will punish you. It will end in tragedy, and even if you don't worry about your eternal damnation in hell, the tragedy will start for you on earth, because you will be like Macbeth, unable to take any pleasure even in the present moment, and it will just be an endless series of tomorrows where each day is the same, pointless and devoid of joy. So you too would become a victim of nihilism and therefore take no joy in life. So again, we've covered guilt, morality, power, kingship, and Macbeth. We now need to hit the supernatural, which we will do through the theme of fate and destiny. So if we come back to this quotation, the petty pace could indeed be leading Macbeth towards a final destiny. And Macbeth's complaint isn't that he has a destiny at the end of the road, it's that getting to that destiny has ruined his pleasure in life. So here, if we think about the traditions of tragedy, which come from the Greeks, the gods have punished Macbeth for his fatal flaw, which was ambition, and they've punished him by taking away his capacity to feel joy, or indeed any other emotion except fear. And at this stage in the play, he no longer has fears. Remember, he says, "I forgot the taste of fears." No emotion is left to him. Now, Shakespeare has done the opposite of the Greek tragedy plays. So the Greeks invented the idea of tragedy, and in their plays, the character tried to escape their fate. They knew what their fate was, and they tried to escape it because usually the fate was horrible. Well, here the reverse has happened. Macbeth's fate appears to be that he will become king. Seems to be a wonderful fate, but he ruins it by not waiting to become king and instead turning to regicide and then further murder in order to become king and keep his kingship. So one reading of this is Shakespeare is suggesting that we make our own fate. You know, we are in charge of our own lives. So from Shakespeare's point of view, the nihilistic approach is wrong. We can change our own lives by taking control of our own fates. Macbeth's problem is that he has chosen immoral and evil ways to bring about his own fate, and therefore he has taught bloody instruction, as he says himself, and therefore people turn against him. He's not able to enjoy his goal of kingship. So this brings us on to the idea of the supernatural. Did the witches actually make Macbeth do anything? Well, I would argue that they didn't. They simply described what the future could be, or if you like, would be. They might have a supernatural perspective in the sense that they can see the future, but that doesn't mean they can anyway create the future. If we go back to these words, Macbeth doesn't blame the witches here at all. What he's saying is that my fate is the end of my life, it's just written already, and it's not the witches who have put me on this path. And in a way, he's saying it's not even himself that has put himself on this path. It is the terrible experience of life. Life itself is pointless, no matter who you are, even a king. And therefore, it's existence that's the problem. It's not the witches. And also, this is a way of him being able to deny that it's him. Which brings us back to the idea of guilt. Perhaps this is a way of him avoiding his guilt for bringing about the tragic death of his wife. The key thing here is that Macbeth is accepting no blame for the situation he's in. Okay, let's now look at the things that you won't probably be asked about: Duncan, Banquo and Macduff. Well, Macbeth's end here points to what a good alternative king Duncan might have been. Duncan is able to delight in the present in the way that Macbeth isn't. Duncan dies while trying to enjoy a feast after his victory and celebrate Macbeth's part and give further honours to him. And again, this is Shakespeare's way of saying what a king should be like. And to remember, this play is being performed in court. This is another form of celebration, another form of variety in life, which King James is bringing to his court. So this is another way that Shakespeare is telling his audience what a great king King James is by having Shakespeare write and produce this play. We can also see this as a final victory for Banquo. So Macbeth's lack of pleasure in life is because he's always fixed on the future. He is obsessed with tomorrow. And it's the far-flung tomorrows where Banquo's sons will be king, that have driven Macbeth to despair. So this is the moment when he realises that Banquo has won, and this would be relevant to Shakespeare's audience because it was widely believed at the time that King James was a descendant of Banquo, and therefore he comes from noble origins. It's important for Shakespeare to present Banquo as a good figure. Right, how are we going to link this to Macduff? Well, Macduff is the answer to Macbeth's nihilism. Macduff is the moment where this view of life is going to change. He's going to give Macbeth that final inflection of pace. He is going to be the agent of Macbeth's death. And this is a death that Macbeth finally welcomes. Remember, Macduff gives him the opportunity of surrendering, in which case he will be displayed in a cage to be the laugh and show of the time. But the cage is a metaphor for the cage Macbeth is already in. Time has already caged him in a series of endless tomorrows which are petty and the same from day to day. And to break out of that cage, Macbeth chooses death. Knowing that Macduff is going to kill him, he fights on. So there you go. I hope that was reasonably waffle free. You've got this key vocabulary that's going to get you the grade 7 and above in any single essay you could possibly get. And you know you're going to use this quotation no matter what the question. So let me know in the comments below whether this new style of video helps and whether my illustrations make the quotations more memorable. As usual, see you soon on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe.